So I'd like to talk about how you get the most out of your annual board assessment. So you've served on a lot of boards. What have you found that works best?
The first thing I would say is there's no one size that fits all. I think the key is to make sure that the assessment tool is effective and covers what you want it to cover. So having a process that starts with that, and that's the case in all of my boards.
When you think about planning the assessment, what are your boards doing in advance to make sure that the outcome is what you'd like?
Right. There's a very active dialogue. The meeting before the assessment process starts, where the board will review the questionnaire that's going to be used and have a proactive conversation about what's the objective of doing the assessment to begin with. What would we like to get out of it? What do we want people to focus on? And then the open-ended question, are the questions right? Do the questions help us achieve the objective that we want to achieve? That conversation happens in the executive session of all of my boards, and it also happens at the committee level in reviewing the committee evaluations. The other thing I think is pretty much of a best practice that happens on a couple of my boards on the individual peer-to-peer assessments. They have an outside firm that takes a look at it and thinks about the right way to ask the questions to really evaluate skill assessments, things that are connected to the succession planning, and that type of thing. So the assessment tool itself gets quite a vetting before it's then used for the process.
How do you ensure that you're doing the right follow-up post-assessment and that the feedback is going to the full board, to the committees, and to individual directors?
Mm-hmm. So if it's the full board assessment, that's discussed in the full board executive session led by the board chair and or the NomGov chair. If it's in the committees, that same discussion of the committee assessment is done in executive session. And what those conversations usually sound like is a summary of what the findings were on each question, but a real focus on what were the comments. People can rank things, yes, this is great, it meets our needs or whatever, but what are the comments and suggestions that people are making to make improvements? And then you'll see the committee chair, if it's at the committee level, or the board chair, or he'll assign it to a committee chair or whoever is appropriate, but actually assign accountability for taking whatever action needs to be taken.
Right.
On the individual level, there's usually a private session with the particular director who was evaluated, where the feedback is given in a very frank and open way. The surveys or assessments are done anonymously, so it's kind of the collective feedback of the board where you would share with that person the positives of what their peers think is going well and how their skills fit with the board and how they're utilizing those skills to be effective in the boardroom. And then they'd also give them any opportunities that came up on the survey if people identified areas for improvement for that person.
When you look at it, only about a third of public companies actually do individual director evaluations, and some boards are reluctant to do it.
I think it's valuable when done in a constructive and anonymous way, but it's a useful way for people to get the read of how they're being perceived by their peers and get suggestions on how they might moderate their behavior or do something different to be more effective in the boardroom. I think when you have an individual peer-to-peer assessment process, it also takes some of the personal aspect out of it because it's a process where everybody is reviewed. You're reviewed versus the skills that are needed for the board, not just today, but going forward. But because it's a routine, systematic process, you expect that, and hopefully most directors take it as constructive feedback if there's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.